Imagine a world where AI is just developing crazy fast and climate action is sort of taking a back seat, and then vaccine hesitancy is on the rise. That's not like some dystopian sci-fi movie, right? That's one potential reality if Trump gets a second term.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. I mean, we're not just talking about like hypotheticals here. We've got, Trump's campaign promises and what he did during his first term. There's a pattern there that gives us a glimpse into what could happen.
And that's what we're doing today.
Yeah.
We're diving deep into what a second Trump presidency could mean for AI, climate change, global health. We've got a ton of sources here, expert opinions, policy proposals, the whole nine yards.
Let's kick things off with AI. One of Trump's big promises is to get rid of Biden's AI executive order. The one that tried to set some rules for ethical and safe AI development.
So more of a move fast and break things kind of approach?
It's easy to see it that way.
Yeah.
Like it could really speed up innovation. But there's another side to it. Think about all those biased algorithms running around, unchecked data privacy violations getting even worse.
This isn't just some theoretical tech debate. We're talking about real-world consequences, right?
Absolutely. Imagine a hiring algorithm that's trained on data that's full of bias. It could end up unfairly shutting out women or minorities from jobs just because of how it was programmed. That's a very real concern if we start rolling back regulations.
That's a pretty scary thought. It's not just about robots taking over the world. It's about the sneaky ways AI could be used to make existing inequalities even worse.
And some experts are worried about even scarier scenarios. Roman Yampolsky, who researches AI safety, has warned about what could happen if we let superintelligent AI develop without any controls. He says that without the right safeguards, we could end up in a situation where AI gets so powerful that it's beyond our control, leading to unpredictable and potentially really dangerous outcomes.
Okay, now we're getting into Terminator territory. I get it. It's about finding that balance between encouraging innovation and making sure AI is developed responsibly.
Exactly. And that's a debate that's going to become even more important in the next few years, especially if Trump does what he said he'd do and deregulates the AI industry.
So potentially a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of risks where it comes to AI. Now let's switch gears and talk about climate change. Trump has said that he wants to undo a lot of what Biden did on climate. What are the key things our listeners should know about?
One of the biggest potential changes is that he might pull out of the Paris Agreement, which would be a major step back from global climate leadership. If the U.S. backs out, it could mean other countries like China won't feel as much pressure to meet their own emissions targets.
So it's like a domino effect where other countries say, well, if the U.S. isn't taking it seriously, why should we?
Exactly. And this is happening at a time when the science on climate change is stronger than ever, and the need for action is more urgent. We're already seeing the effects of climate change all over the world, from crazy weather events to rising sea levels.
And it's not just about the environment, right? There are economic and geopolitical consequences too.
Absolutely. Shifting to cleaner energy is going to create new jobs, new industries, new chances for countries to work together. But if the U.S. steps back from being a leader, it risks getting left behind in this rapidly changing landscape.
It seems like Trump's approach to climate change goes against what most of the world thinks. But what about Biden's Inflation Reduction Act? Didn't that put a lot of money into clean energy? Couldn't that help offset some of these potential rollbacks?
The Inflation Reduction Act was a big deal, and it might be hard to completely get rid of its investments in clean energy. However, a second Trump administration could really slow down how those investments are put into action and weaken the overall impact of the act. It's a complicated situation with a lot of different factors at play.
So it could be like a tug of war between two very different visions for the future of energy. Okay, we've talked about AI and climate change, but there's another big area we need to talk about: health policy. And one of the biggest worries here is Trump's connection to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's a well-known vaccine skeptic.
This alliance is causing a lot of concern in the public health world. If Kennedy gets a powerful position in the administration, it could really impact how much people trust vaccines and the direction of health policy in general.
We're just coming out of a global pandemic where vaccines literally saved lives. The thought of vaccine hesitancy coming back is honestly pretty terrifying.
It's a valid concern. Public health experts like George's Benjamin are worried about what could happen if the government starts taking an anti-science approach. They're afraid it could lead to important public health measures being reversed and preventable diseases coming back.
It's a scary thought. We've seen how fast misinformation can spread, especially online.
And this is where AI and health policy could potentially collide in a really bad way. Imagine algorithms boosting anti-vaccine messages or spreading false information about important health issues. That's a recipe for disaster.
So we've got AI potentially going off the rails, climate action possibly taking a hit, and a resurgence in vaccine hesitancy. It's a lot to process. Are there any bright spots in all of this? Where can our listeners find some hope in the middle of all this uncertainty?
It's important to remember that even with all this potential for upheaval, there are scientists, activists, policymakers, and everyday people who are really dedicated to building a better future. The fight for a more just sustainable and healthy world is still going strong.
That's a good point. It's not about giving in to fear or despair. It's about staying informed, engaged, and hopeful. And speaking of staying informed, we've only scratched the surface of this complex situation. There's so much more to talk about, especially when it comes to global health funding and what's going to happen with scientific collaboration.
We're going to get into those topics in the next part of our deep dive, so stick around for more insights and analysis as we explore the potential ripple effects of a second Trump term.
So we were just talking about the possibility of vaccine hesitancy making a comeback under a second Trump term.
Yeah, and that brings us to a bigger worry. The potential impact on global health funding. I mean, Trump's been pretty critical of the World Health Organization in the past. It makes you wonder if the U.S. might pull back from global health initiatives.
Didn't he mention during the campaign something about cutting back support for programs like the Global AIDS Initiative? That's a pretty big deal, right?
It is. The U.S. has been a major funder for these programs. They've made a real difference in fighting diseases and improving health outcomes around the world. If the U.S. steps back, it could have a huge impact globally, potentially affecting millions of lives.
It's easy to forget how interconnected global health really is. You know, what happens in one part of the world can quickly affect everyone else. We saw that with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Exactly. Outbreaks and pandemics don't care about borders. If the U.S. takes a less active role in global health initiatives, it could mean slower response, times less funding for research and development, and ultimately greater risks for everyone, even here in the U.S.
So on one hand, we've got AI potentially running wild, and on the other hand, the U.S. may be pulling back from its global health commitments. It's a lot to think about.
It's a complicated situation, and it's important to understand what could happen if these policies change. And there's another aspect to consider, the potential impact on scientific collaboration.
You're talking about things like the travel bans and the China initiative. Those were pretty controversial during Trump's first term.
Exactly. They caused a lot of tension in the scientific community and made people worry about the future of international collaboration. There's a chance we could see those policies come back under a second Trump administration, and that could really hinder scientific progress.
I mean, science is all about global cooperation, right? Sharing knowledge, working together to solve the world's biggest problems. It seems counterproductive to put up barriers to that kind of collaboration.
In a perfect world, science would go beyond political boundaries. And there has been talk of a new U.S.-China scientific cooperation agreement. But it's hard to say what will happen. If Trump focuses on an America-first approach to science, it could really discourage international partnerships.
That's a worrying thought. I mean, international collaboration was key in developing the COVID-19 vaccines. Hindering that kind of cooperation could have serious consequences for future scientific breakthroughs.
Caroline Wagner, a researcher at Ohio State who studies science diplomacy, has talked about how important face-to-face interaction and collaborative research are for driving scientific progress. If we restrict those interactions, it could really slow down the pace of discovery and innovation.
Okay, so we've got AI potentially going crazy, climate change getting ignored, global health funding shrinking, and scientists potentially being kept apart. Is there anything we haven't covered yet?
Well, we could talk about the potential impact on cybersecurity, space exploration, the future of education.
Hold on a second. My brain's already overloaded. Let's take a step back and look at the big picture. What are the key takeaways from all of this?
I think the main thing to remember is that a second Trump term could be a real turning point. The decisions made over the next 4 years could have a huge impact on the entire world, not just the U.S. It's important to recognize there could be both progress and setbacks, and to understand the trade-offs involved.
So it's not all good or all bad. It's complicated. There are nuances, unintended consequences. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, and that's where critical thinking comes in. It's about questioning assumptions, looking beyond the headlines, and having thoughtful, informed discussions about these complex issues.
So you're saying I shouldn't panic and build a bunker just yet?
Well, having a well-stocked bunker might not be a bad idea. But seriously, it's about staying informed, talking to each other constructively, and using your voice to shape the future you want.
Okay, I like that. It's not about giving in to fear. It's about using what we know to empower ourselves and our communities.
Exactly. And that's where you, the listener, come in. The future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make both individually and as a society. And that brings us to what might be the most important part of all of this.
Okay, I'm all ears. What is it?
It's about what all of this means for you, the listener, and the choices you face in this rapidly changing world.
That sounds pretty deep. I'm ready to go there. Let's unpack that in part 3. All right, so we've really dug into some heavy stuff. AI, climate change, global health. It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by how big and complicated these challenges are.
Yeah, it's true. These are big issues with global consequences. But even with all that complexity, it's important to remember that we still have the ability to act, to shape the future we want to see.
That's good to hear. But where do we even start? I mean, these issues feel so huge, so systemic. What can one person really do to make a difference?
Well, it starts with a change in perspective. Instead of feeling powerless, think about the power you actually have.
Yeah.
Your choices, your voice, your influence on the people around you.
So it's about focusing on what we can actually control instead of getting stuck on the things we can't.
Right. And that starts with looking inward. Ask yourself, what are my values? What kind of future do I want? Once you have a clear vision, you can start to make choices that match your beliefs.
Okay, I get that. But can you give me some examples? Let's say I'm worried about biased algorithms. What can I actually do besides just knowing about the problem?
Knowing about it is a good first step, but you can go further. Start by being more careful about the information you see online. Fact-check sources, get your news from a variety of places, question your own assumptions. Don't just passively take in whatever the algorithm throws at you.
So be more active in shaping your own online experience instead of letting the algorithms decide what you see.
Exactly. And if you're really passionate about ethical AI, think about supporting organizations that are working to promote responsible AI development. There are groups out there pushing for transparency, accountability, and fairness in how AI is designed and used.
That's great advice. What about climate change? We talked about the U.S. potentially backtracking on its commitments. What can people do to counter that, besides just recycling and driving less?
Those everyday actions are important, but you're right, we need to think bigger. Get involved in local environmental groups. Support businesses that are committed to sustainability. Vote for candidates who make climate action a priority. And don't underestimate the power of talking to people. Talk to your friends and family about these issues. Share your concerns and advocate for change in your own community.
So it's about using whatever influence you have, big or small, to push for change. And what about global health? We talked about potential funding cuts and the U.S. maybe scaling back its support for international initiatives. What can listeners do to make a difference there?
There are lots of ways to get involved. You can support organizations working on the front lines of global health challenges, groups providing medical care, fighting infectious diseases, making sure people have access to essential medicines. You can donate to global health initiatives, learn more about the challenges facing different communities around the world, and push for policies that prioritize global health security.
It's a good reminder that even though these problems might seem far away, we can still do things right here, right now to make a difference. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to a bigger movement for change.
Absolutely. And never underestimate the ripple effect of individual actions. Your choices, your voice, your commitment to these issues can inspire others to take action too. It's about building a movement for change from the ground up.
Okay, so we've talked about what individuals can do, but what about the bigger picture? If you could give one piece of advice to the next administration, whoever that might be, what would it be?
I would urge them to make collaboration a top priority. Both within the U.S. and internationally, address the root causes of these issues, not just the symptoms. And most importantly, listen to the experts, listen to the people, and make decisions based on evidence, not ideology.
It sounds simple, but in the world we live in today, those principles can feel pretty radical. It's about embracing complexity and nuance and understanding that we're all in this together.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that all these challenges we face, from AI to climate change to global health, they're all interconnected. They need solutions that tackle the underlying social, economic, and political forces that shape our world.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored some pretty scary scenarios, but I hope you, the listener, are leaving here not with a sense of fear, but with a sense of empowerment.
Because the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create together through our choices, our actions, and our unwavering belief that a better world is possible.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
And remember, stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay hopeful.
That's it for today. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.